So Brian Keating is about to come on. Before we dive into this epic man and his journey, it is a phenomenal journey, and it's definitely, I'm sure we're going to feel his pain getting so close to some awesome awards and accolades. Before we dive into that, let's talk about the sponsor message. If you're an entrepreneur, a leader, a world changer, you want to get your message out, come talk to me. I would love to talk to you about being a guest on Becoming Your Greatest Possible Self and support you in doing that. Number two, if you want to have your own platform, launch your own podcast, we have quarterly podcast launch masterminds and masterclasses where we help you go through that process of starting your podcast, launching it, and growing it so you can reach more people and make a bigger impact. And then lastly, if you want some support in connecting with these amazing guests and human beings, I'm happy to make introductions, and it's really easy just to message them and connect with them. They typically make it super easy, finding them on social media, emailing them, whatever it might be. So I encourage you as well to make those connections, because that's how you make the biggest difference, is building those relationships. Next up is the iTunes review of the week, and this week the review is by David Shahade, and David says, Chris is fantastic. The first time I listened to Chris, I knew he is the real deal. He will inspire you to move up higher in the ladder of life, wherever you are, as long as you have the desire to learn. Thank you, Chris, for the great work. David, thanks so much. I appreciate you, man. And if you want to give us a review, let us know what you love about the show, what you want to see more of, go to beyourgps.com/iTunes or search Becoming Your Greatest Possible Self on the iTunes store. And while you're there, make sure you subscribe so you can get all the latest updates on Becoming Your Greatest Possible Self and stay inspired. Daily episodes. Go subscribe to Becoming Your Greatest Possible Self. And I look forward to continuing this beautiful, magnificent journey with you. I'm going to introduce Brian in just a minute. Before that, grab a piece of paper, grab a pen, be ready to take notes to record the wisdom that this man is about to share with you. It is going to be powerfully scientific and I'm sure a lot of fun. So let's introduce him and then we'll bring him on. Brian G. Keating is a professor of physics at the Center for Astrophysics and Space Sciences in the Department of Physics at the University of California, San Diego, where he leads the ACEC Center for Experimental Cosmology. He is also Associate Director of the Arthur Clarke Center for Human Imagination. No stranger to extreme conditions, Professor Keating's experiment, BICEP, was located at the South Pole and received worldwide attention when it prematurely announced what was considered one of the greatest discoveries of all time, evidence for the so-called theory of inflation. This episode and its aftermath became the subject of his first popular science book called Losing the Nobel Prize, a story of cosmology, ambition, and the perils of science's highest honor, published by W. W. Norton. Upon its release, Losing the Nobel Prize won numerous accolades, including being named one of Amazon's best nonfiction books of the month in April 2018 and one of Forbes magazine's best books of the year. Professor Keating is a renowned public speaker, inventor, and expert in the study of the universe. He is also fascinated by the origins of human curiosity, creativity, and the genesis of imagination. He is the co-director of the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination. He is commercially licensed multi-engine jet pilot and aviation enthusiast. He volunteers as a pilot for Angel Flight West, providing free air travel for children and adults with serious medical conditions and other needs. He is a board member of the Fleet Science Center, the San Diego Air and Space Museum, and is active in the San Diego Jewish community. He lives in La Jolla, California, with his wife and children. Oh my goodness gracious. Brian, are you ready to rock this house, superstar?
I am, my friend, I am.
Let's do it. All right, we are now live on Becoming Your Greatest Possible Self. Thank you for being here, dude. You just have a very unique journey, very untypical to the guests who come on this 12-hour marathon. It's like the science, it's the college and professor, it's the Nobel Prize. It's just awesome, man. So I really appreciate you being here because it's going to be a lot of fun and very fresh for us and for our audience.
Yeah,
Thank you,
the
man.
pleasure's all mine, Chris. Thank you.
Absolutely. So let's dive right into the theme of the day, Brian. It is freedom to fly. What does that mean for you? And I'm sure it's going to hit a completely different note since you fly and you're a pilot, but freedom to fly, what does that mean for you, man?
Yeah, so I get a lot of metaphors and ways to analogize what I do through aviation. And really, I think the thing for me is that you can't be free to fly unless you have a flight plan. And that's one of the first things that you learn after you learn that when you get your pilot's license, it's really a license to learn. It's not actually, a certificate that you've mastered more than just a couple of government exams and so forth. But in my case, I was told on that day, which is one of the most memorable days of my life, in addition to when I had my kids, et cetera, that it really was the most dangerous time in my life as a pilot. Wow. That was the beginning of my danger, because when you have a little bit of experience, you may be tempted to think that you have a lot of wisdom. And that metaphor has served to really keep me out of a lot of trouble and knowing how little I know about everything. I mean, you read my bio and so forth. I still have to sing the alphabet song to know what comes after the letter Q. I mean, I'm not really so far out there, my friend. But it's the way that you apply yourself, and that you never want to become complacent, and you always want to have not only the beginner's mind. Because I think if you have the beginner's mind, my 5-year-old has beginner's mind. But if you have the kind of student's mind, and then that will enable you to be a good mentor, a good leader, and a good teacher as well.
Damn. Fire. I love it, Brian. This is great, man. So I mentioned about who you are, what you stand for a little bit in your intro, but in your own words, tell us about yourself professionally and personally, what you stand for, and how you serve the world.
Yeah, so I'm a cosmologist, which means that I won't have much use for the amount of hair that you have. Although you might have a good, mani-pedi going on. I don't know. I mean, you're pretty buff, my friend. But no, in all seriousness, I study cosmology. And the reason I joke about, cosmetology, as I just did, is that they have the same prefix, cosmos. Yeah. What does cosmos mean? Have you ever stopped to think about that? Why does it have something in common with the universe and somebody's appearance? Well, actually, the word cosmos in Greek means face or beauty or appearance. And in the case of what I do as an astronomer, peering back to the very earliest moments of creation, I get to witness and see in great awe the beautiful face that the cosmos presents to us. And that kind of, is really the basic synopsis of a big picture, what I get to do, which is really learn about the universe by building instrumentation that can take us back to perhaps the earliest moments in cosmic creation history.
Wow. Dude, so rad, so rad. And I think that you mentioned I mentioned in the intro in your bio, you are fascinated by people and their curiosity and their imagination. And I think it sounds like you love exploring the different dimensions and aspects of reality and how it all works together and how it all, how it all ticks and how it all just works.
Yeah. I mean, one of the most gratifying things that your clients, your friends, etc., might achieve is a glimpse of understanding of something, whether it be in their business. Yeah. And I always joke, why am I on a podcast? Most of the other illustrious people on this marathon are founders of startups and entrepreneurs, businesswomen, businessmen, leaders, and they're for me, what does a cosmologist do? Well, I always say the universe is the biggest startup that is, was, or ever will be.
That's right.
The Big Bang, came. It's not just a great TV show that just ended sadly, but it is the origin of everything. And what could be a subject of greater curiosity than the ultimate origins of the universe, of life, of consciousness, and of what it really means to be a human being. And I get paid to do that. And don't tell my boss, Governor Gavin Newsom, I would do this job for free. And I think that's the key in life, is find what you really want to do. Be it a pilot, be it an entrepreneur, be it a physics professor, and follow your dreams, but always have kind of that flight plan. That checklist is the most important thing, and maybe we'll get into that. One of my favorite books, The Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gawande, really had a great influence on me and influenced the way that I look at being a small universe entrepreneur. I studied the universe when it was the smallest time it ever was. And how do you do that? How do you lead a team of mostly 20-somethings, millennials, and get them inspired, motivated behind the projects that you have laid out for them to do, to understand the basic origins of humanity, the universe, and everything else?
Wow. Dude, I love it. Brian, this is gold. I know we're going to dive into more of that greatness. Let's go back into the journey and talk about how did you become a professor? How did you discover cosmology? That is me. How did you get there, man?
Yeah, well, it certainly wasn't for the money, and it wasn't for the fame and adoration. Although Neil deGrasse Tyson, Bill Nye, they get a lot of good fun and good attention, well deserved. They're masters at what they do.
Yeah.
For me, it was inspired by other popularizers of science: Carl Sagan, great Carl Sagan, Isaac Asimov, and others who bridged the gap between science fiction and science fact. And in my case, it's delightful to me to be the co-director of the Arthur C. Clarke Center at UC San Diego, where Arthur C. Clarke, 2001: A Space Odyssey, all these, Space Odyssey and other films that he did and books that he wrote, hundreds of books, so much output. But he also had a tremendous impact on science fact. In other words, proposing the first geosynchronous satellites, by which part of this conversation is taking place. And the question of how does a science fiction author inspire a scientist who's doing science nonfiction? And those were great influences on my life. And because of their influence, I came very slowly to realize that you could be a professional astronomer. I thought that was like being a professional wizard, who's going to pay you to be Harry Potter, or roller coaster ride tester? No one's going to pay you to do that, right? And as a state university professor, okay, I don't get that much, but I do okay, thanks, Governor Newsom. But in the case of what I came to realize is that through scholarship, through learning and becoming a master craftsman and learning from craftsmen and women in the apprenticeship that is science, that goes back to the times of the ancient Greeks and will continue on hopefully as long into the future and more, that I had a talent as a scholar, that what I wanted to do is live the life of the mind and develop not only knowledge, which is the meaning of the word science, but also wisdom, and impart that wisdom and knowledge and those lessons learned through decades of commitment to this craft. And it is a craft. You have to really, I always say to my students, I say, I'm the only one with a permanent job. You guys are grad students, you guys are postdocs or untenured faculty, my colleagues. And I say, look, you guys got to love this stuff. You got to live this stuff because, guess what? If you don't, you could be making twice what I make. And in fact, some of my students have gone on to great success at Intel, Amazon, many other private public corporations, and they make twice my salary. So don't do it for the money. It pays well, and I've never complained about the salary. It's certainly fine, but you don't do it for that. You do it for the love of the craft. And for me, since I was 12, when I got my first telescope and realized it was a time machine, that you could look through a cheap telescope. You guys can get on Amazon, use keyword Brian Keating, and I'll get the Amazon smile points. Don't give them to Chris; he's got enough. No, I'm just kidding. If you do get a small telescope, no matter where you are, I was outside of New York City. I wasn't in the middle of the Atacama Desert or the South Pole, where my new telescopes are located. I was instead just outside of New York City in Westchester County, not far away from where you're at, right? And in my case, I could see the same craters on the moon, the same moons of Jupiter, moons of Saturn, rings around Saturn, and the phases of Venus and the Milky Way galaxy and the Andromeda. I could see all these things through a tube that were identical to the sights seen by Galileo, Hubble, Hoyle, all the greatest astronomers of history. And when I realized that there was no class, no barrier, no preventing me from learning about the universe, I was hooked. I still didn't know that you could be a professional astronomer, which is kind of ironic, and that's what I ended up being. But it wasn't until graduate school that I realized I have an edge on some people because some of them are doing it just because it's the only thing they've ever known how to do is be a student. And I actually enjoy being a student. I love learning, and that's why I'm in the process of becoming an FAA flight instructor with my commercial add to my commercial and jet pilot ratings. And in doing so, I hope to continue that because when you're a student, you never stop learning. And that's what I want. There's a really stupid saying. One of the worst, dumbest sayings I've ever heard is, those who can't do, teach. Yep. And that's really one of the worst sayings because it's incorrect. It's fallacious. It's factually inaccurate. Because the best people to teach are the ones that have accomplished the most and done the most. You know this, and that's what makes you a good teacher as well.
Yeah, yeah, and that's so true, man. When you share that wisdom, it actually teaches it to you more, anyways. You know, it ingrains the wisdom, so it becomes from conscious competence into unconscious competence, and you could do it in your sleep. You know, I'm sure on your journey of becoming a commercial instructor for flying, a lot of these things are becoming unconsciously competent because you have to teach it to people. You have to know it like the back of your hand. So when you're up there or whatever, it's just more enjoyable. It's more intuitive. It's more like the plane is a part of you that it's an extension of your arm or your body or whatever it might be.
That's exactly correct. And it becomes mastery, just like playing the violin or, so I'm told. I mean, the only thing I can play is the iPhone, and I don't play that particularly well. But for me, the satisfaction, I've got young kids, and when I see the satisfaction on their faces when they do a puzzle, and they solve a jigsaw puzzle, and it's been occupying them for a while, or a crossword puzzle. Yeah. The first thing they want to do is take it apart or redo it. Why? Because they get a taste of that thrill of discovery, of learning, of the gratitude, of appreciation that you solved something that was a barrier. And that's the feeling that you eventually get mastery over. And that is what science is. It's doing puzzles. It's solving mysteries and learning more and more about the universe around us. It could be no greater, in my mind, occupation for someone who wants to study and learn and contribute to the knowledge base of humanity. Now, not everyone's cut out to do that, and not everyone wants to do that. I don't begrudge those people either, not the least of which because they pay my salary, right? I'd be a total ingrate as a state university professor who gets money. But I always say, that saying, something like, if you're at a poker table and you don't know who the sucker is, you're the sucker. Yep. Well, I always feel like non-scientists in the general public, if you all out there are not captivated by the latest discoveries in science that you're paying for, it's okay. I don't want to call you your listeners suckers, but you're not getting full advantage of your tax dollars. And so learn about what NASA is doing. Learn about what the National Science Foundation is doing. Love it, live it, learn it. And that's kind of my overall advice. You don't have to be a scientist. Not everyone can. Not everyone wants to be. Not everyone should, to be honest. But you can all learn and have that passion, because the greatest thing about science, Chris, in some ways, is that, there's no Republican constellation. There's no like Democrat moon. It gives you a chance to take a break from politics. When you're reading sports and sports, athletes are talking about Trump this or that, and you're just like, wow, there's no politics free zone. Well, there is. It happens to be up in space.
Yeah. I love it. And I hear that the desire and the drive for curiosity to learn and know and understand more, whatever area that is, right? Like you could have this desire to learn about outer space, which you have this burning desire for, Brian. Some people might have this burning desire to learn more about Earth and the cells and biology. Some people might have the desire to learn more about mechanics and how, machines work or technology and robotics work. Like it doesn't matter, whatever your area, or food, I want to be a culinary master and learn these different dimensions and techniques, whatever it is, but create that passion and that drive to learn and grow and discover more. And I think that that's a essential part of being human. If that's missing, you're missing 100%. Out on a human experience that is unlike any other.
Yeah, the human experience is one of curiosity, and that's part of what we do at this UCSD's Center for Human Imagination is we study what impels the human mind, unique amongst all the species, to have a creative curiosity. So I'm sure, my pet dog will be really curious, where did I hide the kibble? Or where did my toddler drop the piece of cheese, because he wants to eat it. But it's not the same as wanting to create a better telescope, a better cure for a disease, and advance science in, as you say, nutrition, technology. I mean, these are the coolest things, and it's like, why do people like me want to live forever? It's not just to just live forever. I want to see the great discovery.
I want to keep creating. I want to keep doing this.
Exactly. And not just me and not just you, but like your students, your clients, my students, and into the future, because they're so much smarter than I am, and they're going to learn things that I don't have access to. That's how you get, in my life, in my mind, that's the only way to have immortality, is through the people that you are blessed to be a part of their lives and trust you. Because teaching, as you've probably learned, you're younger than I am, but you probably have noticed that teaching is actually a form of love. Yeah. Like you can't hate someone then teach them things, and you can't learn from someone that you hate, right? So in my mind, and it's should be completely platonic, obviously, but of what we do. What could be better in life than increasing the amount of love and connection to other human beings?
Man. Yeah, I love it. I love it, Brian. This is gold. So along your journey, you decided to go for a certain achievement in science. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I had an unusual upbringing. My parents were divorced, not super unusual for a child of the 70s. And my father was a great mathematician, great scientist. And what he impressed upon me was both a curiosity in some sense, but also a fierce competitiveness.
Yeah.
And that competition, that competitive spirit extended to him. So it was a lot. If you could imagine, like, a father's son, playing like baseball, and the father like whips the baseball at the kid, like, you think you're better than me,
like T-ball,
great Santini. No, but he was like that in terms of like math and science, and he was really kind of, in many ways a great human being, but in other ways he just kind of didn't know how to be a father and felt like, his sons were there as kind of like sparring partners in the intellectual realm.
Yep.
And so for many years, I felt like I could never get out from under his shadow. And the only way that I could unequivocally get out of his shadow would be to win a Nobel Prize and be a better scientist than he was. It sounds very petty. It sounds very silly. But, it's just like kids, when they want to play football and be better than their pops, that's what happened. And for me, it was the Nobel Prize. In addition to the fact that I was genuinely extremely curious about extending humanity's understanding of the cosmos back to that very first instant. And so as a what's called a postdoc, so in academia, if you want to be a professor at most research universities like UC San Diego, you need to have your PhD in your subject field of expertise. And then after you get your PhD, you're still only used to doing research projects that another individual, your advisor, as your PhD advisor, thesis advisor, has selected for you. After that period of time, you want to demonstrate your independence and your facility to do research on your own as a creative, independent scientist. And so you were hired into this kind of purgatory called postdoctoral scholar or fellow. And that's a period of time when you have to, kind of 2 or 3 years to prove if you got what it takes to get into the major leagues. And it's very competitive to get to a postdoc, and the most prestigious ones in the world, at that time were located at places like Caltech or Stanford for my field of observational cosmology, building telescopes to look at earliest structures in the universe. I got hired by a brilliant professor at Stanford University. She was young and brand new professor there, assistant untenured professor. And she had projects that she wanted me to work on, and she had some freedom, for me as well. But I ended up basically only doing what I wanted to do. And I was not a good employee. And I always joke, someday I'm going to really pay for this. But it was also during 1999. And, you might be too young to remember, but 1999 in the Bay Area, Palo Alto, was one of the most difficult times for somebody making $32,000 a year to have housing, transfer. It was the dot-com boom. 1999 was the peak of the boom, right? And I was a postdoc there. Making $32,000 a year, and people driving Ferraris on the Stanford campus, to go to their startup incubator that they had there. And so I was kind of frustrated. And anyway, I was kind of more interested in the projects that I had ideas to do, which would be to replicate what my greatest scientific hero, Galileo, did 400 years earlier when he used a telescope to look at the night sky for the first time, saw things that were not predicted to be there. And I go into some detail as to what he discovered, why it was so important, and then how he was almost tortured for the discoveries that he made by the Catholic Church, and then later found redemption and humanity as things treated him in the 1600s. Amazing. I think 400 years ago, people were using similar kinds of ideas to learn about the universe that we're using to this very day. Anyway, 1999, I'm there. I keep working on these ideas and projects that I have for my own startup. I'm not working on her startup. I'm working on mine. And then one day she comes in and into the lab and is just like, "You're not doing a good job, man. You're fired." And I was like, "Can't argue with you." Like, yeah, I basically just been coming up with my own ideas for telescopes. I'm sorry I let you down. And she was very gracious, and she arranged for me to get an interview for another job down at Caltech, which is like even bigger in my mind. And I hadn't even dared to apply there, college, whatever. And ended up going down there, got a job offer, accepted it on the spot from one of the greatest cosmologists in recent history, a man by the name of Andrew Lang. And he took me under his wing, much more like a father figure than even my own father had been, to be honest with you. And I ended up creating this experiment called BICEP, which, if it were correct and if it were able to do what it could potentially do, I realized it would take us back to the beginning of time. And in so doing, win that coveted, shiny, golden idol medallion, the Nobel Prize. And that's, for your listeners who might not be familiar, they might have heard Nobel Prize, they might know it's for brainy people, but really it was endowed by a man by the name of Alfred Nobel when he died after creating a bunch of war munitions, explosives, et cetera, and then finally inventing dynamite in 1864. He ended up dying in 1896, and his will was used to benefit mankind via scientific discoveries. Every year is supposed to give out prizes. And that's been done since 1901. And I wanted to win that prize, and I'm sure other people wanted to win it too. And for a while, it looked like we did do that. And I was on the short track to being a selectee for this most prestigious, coveted award humanity has to offer.
Okay, so I want to dive into that. Before that, we had a question from Jessica. Do
you
feel like science is firm, or can science change?
Science is supposed to change. Exactly. It's a very good question. The whole point of science is to prove science wrong. It doesn't mean that scientists don't know what they're talking about. Like, they'll look at a triangle and say it's a circle. But, there's a famous quote by Isaac Asimov, who said something to the effect that if you say the Earth is flat, there's some flat earthers out there. Sorry, guys, you're wrong. The Earth is not flat. It's much more close to a spherical shape, but it's not a perfect sphere. So therefore, if you say it's a perfect sphere, you're also wrong. But if you think that those two ways of being wrong are the same, you're acting foolish, right? So the process of science is to delineate more and more correct things, which means that you'll never get precisely proof of anything being absolutely correct. There are no absolute authorities in science. Einstein was wrong about a half a dozen times, which is too bad because he could have had a good career if he hadn't made it. Galileo made many mistakes. Newton made tremendous numbers of mistakes, and yet they created and contributed to human knowledge more than most any scientists such as myself could ever hope to. So, science is about refining, getting better accuracy, getting finer and finer precision on the limits of things that you could measure. And in so doing, you're actually winnowing down the number of things that could be true about the universe. So now you know the limited number of things that are true, from which you can deduce more and more information about things you may not know about currently.
Yeah, and it's the way I see it is we all have our own perspective, and we all have our own filters that our minds process and see things through. So it's like if I say this is gray and you say no, it's green, like you might be true in your eyes and I might be true in my eyes. And it's like for someone who's like standing on Saturn and they drop a baseball, it drops at whatever speed, and someone who drops it on the Earth, it drops at the velocity of 9.8 meters per second, something like that, right?
So great, right?
So it's like for everyone, they have their own perspective that's true for them, and it sounds like the more we get these different perspectives and angles to triangulate and be able to verify, oh yeah, that's true for there and there and there. Okay, so then it's like as true as we've gotten to today, and as science evolves, it says, well, did you consider this perspective to attempt to disprove that? Well, all these people say it's like that, but what about this? So then you get more truth, more accurate
and even
truth.
the things that are wrong, quote unquote, or not fully descriptive, they still have incredible applicability. The most famous example of that is when astronauts went to the moon in the 60s and 70s, they were guided not by Einstein's theory of general relativity, which is the correct theory of gravity, but they were guided by Newton's laws of gravity, which have no ultimate truth in the sense that Einstein's laws subsume Newton's laws. But the Newton's laws, you would never use in your calculator, that 9.8 meters per second. Like, you wouldn't put in the actual gravitational effects that Einstein calculated. It would be completely meaningless on the scale of, getting from here to the moon even. And so that's fascinating that even things that are wrong, quote unquote, or not fully accurate still have tremendous import for our daily lives.
Yeah. Wow, that's powerful. I love it. So you were on this burning quest to achieve the Nobel Prize. What happened, man?
Yeah, so along the way, we actually did something that, as I describe in the book, is really something that scientists throughout history, that when they've looked up at the heavens, have oftentimes seen the thing that they wanted to see, even though it wasn't really there. So I'll give you an example. So Galileo, when he was coming up with the theory or coming up with the evidence for what's called the Copernicus model of the universe, or that the Earth is not the center of the solar system. Right. Instead, the sun is the center of the solar. He had all sorts of ideas. And one of those ways to prove that Copernicus was right was to show that the tides, the Earth's high tide, low tide pattern, is caused by the combination of the Earth's rotation on its axis and its revolution around the sun, because otherwise the Earth wouldn't have tides, as he said. So it was a combination of, kind of rotating this cup of vodka, and no, it's water, on its axis, and then the water kind of sloshes around. That was his theory. And he used it to that was his evidence. He uses evidence, the tides, to prove a theory. So this kind of deductive way of looking at things. But in truth, the evidence was nowhere near there for the proof that the Earth's tides are caused by the rotation of the Earth. And those are, in fact, minuscule in effect. What's actually causing the tides, high tide, low tide on Earth, is due to the gravitational asymmetry of the moon on the Earth. It has nothing to do with the sun. You couldn't prove that, but he was so in love with the theory of Copernicus that he even kind of twisted how he interpreted his data, which were accurate. So sometimes accurate observations can lead to incorrect theories. And that's, in some sense, what happened to me and my team on BICEP. So what we ended up seeing with our telescope, designed to look for the very earliest imprints of the fossil, relics, shrapnel left over from the Big Bang, called inflationary gravitational wave B-mode radiation. That's a big sentence. You don't have to know exactly what that is. Suffice it to say that if we were right, not only would we have won a Nobel Prize, but we would have taken the earliest picture of the baby universe that could ever possibly be taken, when the universe was a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second old, a 1, 35 zeros, and a 1. And so it was just an astonishing thing that we discovered. Unfortunately, and that was what we set out to discover, and we did discover it. Unfortunately, we overlooked the fact, even though we were always concerned about this, we overlooked the possibility that perhaps the signal would also contain a source of contamination, namely that there are other sources of this type of radiation that we saw, this polarization pattern that we saw, that aren't cosmological in nature. It's kind of like if you want to see some pattern through a telescope, just an ordinary spyglass, but there's some dust on the lens cap or something unclean about it, and then you see a mirage, something that's not really there, an oasis in the desert when it's not there. In order to convince yourself, when you have that confirmation bias, when you're susceptible to wanting to prove the theory, as Galileo did so stupendously, that often happens. It happens a lot in science. And so we knew it was a possibility that there could be other sources of signal. In our case, it was actually dust. It was grains of microscopic stardust in the galaxy, not in the universe, that we had seen. And so we didn't make a blunder. We didn't leave the lens cap on or forget the cleaner. We observed for 3 years from the bottom of the world, Antarctica, which is one of the most dangerous, perilous, and also exciting and beautiful places on the planet to go to. And I've been there twice. Wow. When you go there, you feel like you're on another planet, another ice planet, a world like Hoth or something, from Star Wars. Yeah. Star Wars. And when you're there, you're really so isolated. You're so distant. There might only be 1,000 people on the whole continent, which is bigger than, Australia, basically. 1,000 people on the whole continent. So you could be the baldest person on the continent, which I don't think you could do in America. There's other baldies. Some of my good friends are, I finally paid off this hairstyle. But anyway, so we had to basically eventually retract the statement that we had made, that we had witnessed the birth of the Big Bang. And it was very, as I say, it was very humiliating at first to have to kind of try to almost pull back in this massive amount of media that we got. We got front page of the New York Times, front page of the Economist magazine, every newspaper around the world, CNN, NBC, everyone covered it. And eventually we had to basically, retract it. And it made me think of these words, the statement I once heard, like, may our words be sweet, because we may have to eat them someday. Again, we made a miraculous discovery, and the accuracy is unquestioned in terms of like what we actually saw once we understood the interpretation. But we kind of rushed a little bit, and in my feeling, just for me personally, it was driven in my case, the desire to go forward in part wanting to win the Nobel Prize. And we didn't, and hence the title of my book. So spoiler alert, Brian Keating did not win the Nobel Prize. And just after that, the thing that was so interesting to me, like within months of having to basically retract this claim, I got a letter from the Nobel committee, this committee that I had hoped would invite me to receive this gilded medallion, right? And they were instead asking me to nominate people that are better than me, that really deserve the Nobel Prize.
Oh my gosh.
And that set me off on a totally different quest to understand why is the Nobel Prize, why was it so important to me? Why is it so important to scientists and even lay people? And we can get into that, I'm sure, as well. It's sort of the highest accolade that the entire planet has to offer any human being.
Wow, dude, that is nuts. And I love how it's the driver, right? There's a driver. You're trying to understand the drivers, the cause of causation of why, and
That's
you
right.
do that with the universe, and you also do it with the Nobel Prize, and why so many human beings have this. They pour
Exactly.
their heart,
it's so,
their soul, their
Yes.
life into this, man.
It's so funny because Clint Eastwood's son Scott, he has a podcast as well, Live Your Best Life, and I was on it last summer. And he came down and interviewed me, and we're talking, and I'm like, Hollywood has a lot of parallels with science, and even though we don't really admit it, if you look at the actual organization that awards Oscars, it's called the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. And so I was like, but the way that you guys give your science medals, your Oscars, your medallions is a little bit more refined in some ways. And I think there's also these parallels, as you mentioned, kind of recapitulating what I said earlier. Not that many people do science, or probably nobody does science just to win a Nobel Prize. Right. Just as I said to Scott Eastwood, I said, just as most actors and actresses don't do a film expecting to win an Oscar. And I think, take like one of these dumb movies, like Fast and the Furious movies. Like, they don't expect, if you're an actor in that, you don't expect to win an Oscar. It's too crummy. He's like, I was in Fast and the Furious 5. And he just sat there. I'm like, oh. But he was really cool about it. I said, what I mean. I didn't mean you specifically. You're, phenomenal. But I bet, your movie studio didn't put pressure on you to win an Oscar for that. But your other roles, when you auditioned for, American Sniper, which eventually his father directed, he auditioned for the part of Chris Kyle. But those things can lead to Oscars. And so movie studios may want them to win it more than the actors and actresses themselves. A lot of parallels with science in terms of the Nobel Prize.
Well, I think that's a really interesting thing that you're mentioning, because even in personal development and the marketing ourselves and building brands online, people can have this aspiration to having the biggest, the best brand, the most noteworthy. And I feel like when they strive for that, it's superficial and they don't get the momentum that they want. And I know for me, that was part of the reason why I wanted to succeed, is I wanted the fame, I wanted the glory, right? And there's a part of that that's still true. And when I started serving other people and finding out the truths, so to speak, of our industry that would really make a difference and producing real results for people, that's when things started to click and get that momentum. It's almost like in the beginning, I was in the naivety stage of all the glamour and glory, and then when I transitioned into I'm committed to mastery and mastering the basics, however fucking long it takes, I'm gonna do it, and that's really what had me step into a feeling of flow and purposefulness.
Yeah, exactly. And once you have that, and you have that connection to the craft being almost a part of who you are, I mean, there's really no better feeling, I would say, than that. And so, yes, it's quite amazing to be able to experience, how things unfold when you're perfectly synchronized and you're working in harmony. Your talents, your interests, your curiosity are all put together.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of millennials who you come across have a extreme low amount of patience to be able to discover those gifts and get things into alignment, because it can take time. And I think a lot of people want things yesterday, and when they don't have that grace and that compassion for themselves, they can be really hard on themselves.
Yeah, exactly. I always feel like, if you want instant gratification, studying the billion-year-old universe is not the right field for you.
Oh my gosh, I love it. So you wrote the book to share about your experience and these drivers, so to speak, of why people wanted to go get the Nobel Prize. What did you learn about yourself and about those the drivers and human tendencies and this prize?
Yeah, that's a great question. What I wanted to really understand, and kind of delve into once I started writing the book. And I should say, most of the book is not about the Nobel Prize. It's really a memoir, an autobiography of what it's like to be a scientist or anybody on the cutting edge of aspiration and human limitation. And for me, the Nobel Prize only makes up about 3 chapters, and they're color-coded in the books. You don't have to read them if you don't care about the Nobel Prize. But the rest is a journey of a young scientist finding his way, wanting to make a mark, and really wanting to stand out. And so it could be applicable to anyone, starting a business, but trying to be a high school, president of their class, et cetera, et cetera. And from the perspective of wanting to see what motivates people, I realized that most people don't get to be, the Academy Award winner. Most people don't get to be the high school class president. Most people don't get to be the Fortune 500 CEO. And so you're going to spend more time in a state of not accomplishing what you want to accomplish. And then even when you accomplish it, you win the World Series, you win the Super Bowl, what happens next year? I mean, you're one of 30 teams, and you have got a 3% chance of winning it. It's very rare to be the Patriots or whatever, right? But or in Major League Baseball, it's even more rare to have such dynasties. So you're going to lose. You're going to experience friction, and friction leads to growth. And, I follow this guy, Ryan Holiday. I'm sure you know about Ryan, and he's a friend that helped me with the book in the early phases. And really understanding, what this kind of stoic mentality can do, where you really are set up for not really for expectations. And I heard a quote, thankfully I'm not in 12-step programs or anything like that. But I feel there's great wisdom in the 12-step process. One of the steps, or one of the sayings that they have rather, is that expectations are premeditated resentments. So I think, I'm going to go on, Chris's show. And immediately tomorrow, my book's going to be number 1, and his audience is going to coalesce, come together, follow me, do this, blah, blah. And then tomorrow it doesn't happen because that's not really likely. Then I'm going to resent that this didn't turn out the way I wanted. Right. So lowering the expectations, living in a state of gratitude, and really expecting adversity. So one of the talks I gave to a high school graduation a couple of years ago was called "Reach for the Heavens, but Expect Headwinds." Headwinds. So it's appropriate for your flying theme. And it's basically the simple observation like this. So I live in San Diego. Let's say I'm flying to San Francisco, and I'm in a jet, my favorite jet, F-16, I'm flying it, whatever. And I'm going 500 miles an hour, and San Francisco is 500 miles from San Diego. And there's a headwind, and it's blowing 100 miles an hour. So it's going to take me a little bit longer to get there. But you might think when you come back, you're going to make up that differential because now you're going to have a tailwind. You're going to go going 600 miles an hour, so you'll make it there shorter. Turns out you do the math, and you can find this out. You spend more than twice the average time if there's headwinds at all. And you can see that. Imagine if you're flying down from San Francisco to San Diego, and you've got a 500 mile an hour tailwind. Wow, you're going 1,000 miles an hour. That's great. Now you turn around and you go back north, and you're going 0 miles an hour. You'll never get there. So the lesson is you're going to spend more time in the headwind. So enjoy that headwind. Enjoy that friction. Take time. See the scenery. Experience it. Because when you get there, right? It happens instantaneously. Yeah. And so those are the lessons I learned, in addition to really realizing that these idols, these mechanisms to inspire people, whether it be by money. I read yesterday, so every day I read some business book. So I was reading Ray Dalio's new book, Principles. Yep. And the last page of the chapter before he gets on to his life principles, he's talking about his work principles. And he's saying how to visualize what your goals are. Your goal may be to win an Academy Award. Your goal may be to make a lot of money. Yeah. And I was thinking if he said about scientists, your goal might be to win a Nobel Prize. And it really is set up in this false dichotomy that if you don't achieve that, then you're a failure. You're a loser. You're not. But in reality, most of us don't make it to the promised land, no matter what it is. So money or fame or fortune. So in my case, I really realized that, and that was the greatest gift of all.
Wow. That's beautiful. What do you see as the next chapter of your journey? What's the creation? What are you out to create? How do you want to impact humanity?
Yeah. So there's a philosopher writer, Santayana, who said, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And I think the lesson that I took most away from the bicep episode was one of humility, and really seeing that a tiny grain of dust could basically upend a scientific quest. And it made me think of this great thinker, Gandhi. And Gandhi said, the seeker after truth should be humbler than the dust. The world crushes dust under its feet, but the seeker after truth humbles himself that even the dust could crush him. And only then, and not until then, will he have a glimpse of truth. And to me, that was a perfect lesson. You need to be humble, but not humiliated. And that's, kind of the title of our conversation today, right? So you want to learn from those mistakes, have humility that even a grain of dust, which you step on, your kids make, you got to vacuum up with the dustbuster, which is now in its 40th anniversary of the dustbuster.
Wow.
So we're basically building a cosmic dustbuster. We're going out into space now and we're sucking. We're actually building a special kind of device within our new telescope called the Simons Observatory. And the BICEP team is building a similar one now. I'm not as much involved anymore with that particular team, but I'm leading the Simons Observatory team to not only look for the glorious cosmic signals of the birth pangs of the Big Bang, but also look for the humblest substance in the universe, this dust, the schmutz, the stuff that got in the way of our previous discovery. And by looking at the dust and the dust alone with some of our channels and some of our detectors, and then looking, if we eventually do see a cosmic signal plus some dust, we can subtract the two from each other, and then what we're left with will be this pristine view, we hope, of the early universe. And so in that case, working with a big team, which is comprised of people on all 7 continents, all age groups, all genders, all races, etc. It's just the most wonderful experience in my life. And we bring together people, just for example, we bring together, practicing devout Catholics, Jews, Muslims. We bring together atheists, Buddhists, Jains. It's amazing the diversity of science. And that's one of my favorite things. I get to work with, I had a kid that worked for me a couple of years ago in my lab as an undergraduate, interning, getting experience. He was originally from Uganda. I've had kids in Ukraine. I've had kids from Thailand. I've had kids from South Africa. I've had the entire planet that I've had the honor to mentor and to teach. And there's no other place that, in terms of, a career, shall I say, that I would have had such an ability to influence people's lives and be influenced by them and learn from them.
Damn, that's incredible, man. So it's the humility is the big thing that you're out to share with people. And I love how you mentioned there's science that's like, okay, we want to look for the obvious. We want to look for those the traces of the Big Bang and say, of course, how did the universe start? You're looking for what are the things that most people aren't looking at, the blips, the errors, the inaccuracies, and how can we look at those things that most people say, that's nothing, and use it to create patterns and data so that the other people, let's say the other teams who are looking at the obvious things for those patterns, when they cross-reference with us, then they get a more accurate view of the truth. And I think that other people might say, oh, Brian, what you're doing is not so glamorous, but you're like, man, without me, you wouldn't have the total truth.
Yeah. Well, I've never been accused of having a small ego. So, no matter what, even if I just look at dust, I'm going to, say it's cosmic dust. It's, so from the perspective of wanting to learn more about the universe is, the study of science is really a chain, and each person can only be one link in it. And in my book, I have a picture of my academic genealogy, and through the magic of the oracle of science known as Wikipedia, I'm able to trace back. And my graduate student, when she graduated a couple of years ago, she made this beautiful bronze plaque. And it showed my entire genealogy stretching back to late 1590s. It was unbelievable. 17 generations of scientists. And here I was. And then I imagined myself, well, what's going to happen in the future, 17 generations from now? And she's going to be a professor. She is a professor now. And having all these students and students of students. I met her first student, my grand student. Okay. It's amazing. And, I hope to live to be, 180 maybe, but in that period of time, that's not even close to these, 500, 400 years between. And so it made me think of the definition. And I hope you're not Russian, but if you are, you might be able to concur that the word for scientist in Russian means a person who was taught. It's literally what it means. And so that made me think you really have an obligation as a scientist to be a teacher, because there's no more students unless there's teachers. And as I said before, the dumbest saying by a Nobel Prize winner, George Bernard Shaw, is, those who can't do teach. I put my credentials in doing up against anybody, and yet I prize my abilities and the fact that I'm still learning to be a good teacher. And some say I have a lot further to go, and I'm fine with that, because that's another form of humility. If you can be humble to be a good teacher, in that you have to be a good student and keep that virtuous cycle going, there's no stopping you, man.
Dude, I love it. I love it. This is gold, Brian. So, beginning to wrap it up, what are the final pieces of wisdom you want to give to our audience? If you want to recap what we've touched on, or if there's anything that we missed, let's give it to them, man.
Yeah. So I would say be careful, kind of like check your idols, check the thing that you're worshiping. Is it money? Is it fame? Is it the Nobel Prize? I admit that's a pretty small thing, but Academy Award or Oscar, or Realtor of the Year or Podcaster of the Year, Webby, whatever you are aspiring to out there, because the journey, as I said, is going to be long no matter what you do. Excellence, there's no shortcut up the ladder of authority and success, and hopefully there won't be actual impediments. If there's racism, sexism, whatever, you got to fight that, and that's a righteous fight. But hopefully there's not. Most battles you're going to fight are right in here and in here, between your ears. And you should be comfortable in that, because instead of fixating on the destination, in fact, pilots, we call it destination-itis. It's like, oh, Chris, I got to be back, and I got to fly at this point. I got to be here. And there's a cumulus cloud there. There's granite over there. It's one of the most dangerous things a pilot can say is, I will be there exactly at this time, exactly in this place. The airlines do it well, but they have 2 pilots and huge planes, millions, billions of dollars maintenance behind it. The average little pilot like me, it's much harder to do. So be careful committing, writing checks that you're not going to be able to cash, because you're so fixated on getting this accolade, prize, or adulation, whatever it might be. And I really think, from the lessons that I've learned, it's really to really understand what is your motivating factor. Look honestly, and don't think about just the destination, and don't think about get there-itis. Think about enjoying the journey along the way.
So good, man. I love it. I love that there's the science aspect of you, which I think a lot of people, when they think about science, the scientists especially, there's in my opinion, a stereotype of, man, they're not really grounded in life and in relationship and like the journey of life and like what it's all about. And I love how you bring both worlds together, and you're really a dynamic personality and human being, a lot of fun, man. So you're just really giving science a great name and scientists a great name. You're revolutionizing how the world sees them, man. This was an absolute blast. How can people stay connected with you? What do we want them to do next, man?
Well, if you don't get enough email, in your life, I would love for people to stay connected through my website. You can sign up for my mailing list. It's briankeating.com.
Okay.
And if you do, and when you sign up as your last name, you can use hashtag #BurnItUp. I will send a genuine piece of space dust to the first 10 listeners of this show that live in the USA, because I've been burned before, no pun intended. But if you sign up for my mailing list and you use the hashtag for your last name, hashtag #BurnItUp, I will send you a genuine piece of space dust that's 5 billion years old, man. It's a piece of the early solar system called a meteorite. I'll send you one anyway, Chris. But yeah, first 10 listeners sign up for my mailing list. Otherwise, catch me on Twitter, Dr. Brian Keating, Dr. Brian Keating. And YouTube, same thing, channels. I have a lot of good interviews with really special people all around the world. So yeah, Twitter, YouTube, and my website mailing list.
You're a freaking champion, Brian. I love it. Everyone, go follow this man. Enter in your name and last name, hashtag #BurnItUp, briankeating.com, and follow Brian. And Brian, it's been a pleasure to have you on here, man. I'm super, super stoked to see your discoveries, just expanding what it means to be a human being, and like having all these tools and resources and connecting the dots for us as humanity, both with space, outer space, and knowing about our origins, as well as down here on the planet, and just making life better, man. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's been my honor.
We'll see you soon, okay?
Bye-bye.